We continue to learn new details about the mysterious hospitalization of Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and why Pentagon officials failed to disclose it not only to the public, but also to the president. Last week, Austin was admitted to the ICU at Walter Reed Medical Center after experiencing severe pain following an elective medical procedure. Yet it took defense officials 3 days to inform the White House and his own deputy secretary about his hospitalization. According to administration officials, Biden still has full trust and confidence in the defense secretary and is not currently considering firing him. Meanwhile, the top Republican on the Senate Armed Services Committee calling the delayed disclosure a, quote, shocking defiance of the law. Meanwhile, in the House, GOP conference chairwoman Elise Stefanik released a statement today calling for Austin's resignation. For more on this, I'm joined now by Courtney Kube at the Pentagon and Aaron Gilchrist, who's at the White House. So, Courtney, what more do we know about Secretary Austin's condition and how this all unfolded?
We don't really know anything about what initially caused this hospitalization. So we know that on December 22nd, he had some sort of an elective medical procedure. We don't know what that was at all, any details at all, other than it caused him to spend one night at Walter Reed Hospital. He was discharged on the 23rd. Fast forward to New Year's Day, January 1st, he started experiencing some severe pain that officials here say was directly related to this medical procedure. And it was severe enough and the situation urgent enough that he went via ambulance to Walter Reed Medical Center on Monday evening, New Year's Day. And by the next day, his condition had worsened to the point where he could no longer fulfill the duties of his office, and he transferred some of his authorities and responsibilities to his deputy secretary, Kathleen Hicks. Now, she was on vacation at the time in Puerto Rico, and she was not told why the responsibilities were falling on her until 2 days later on Thursday, when both Deputy Secretary of Defense Kath Hicks and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan were finally informed that Secretary Austin was not only in the hospital, but he was in the intensive care unit. A few more details that we've learned today. There were the majority of the senior defense officials in this building, including the secretaries of the services and the members of the Joint Chiefs. They were not told about this until Friday. Also, members of Congress, senior members of Congress, not told until Friday. But Austin's chief of staff and his senior military aide, and important to us here in the press corridor here, the press secretary, Major General Pat Ryder, they were all told on Tuesday. But still, Ryan, we know that senior members in this administration were still not informed for at least 48 more hours that Secretary Austin was in the hospital, where I will say, Ryan, he remains tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what's remarkable about all of this is that it took so long for the Pentagon to not only publicly disclose this, but to let the White House and these high-ranking White House officials know about this. Do we have any idea why they kept it a secret as long as they did?
We don't. So what's confusing here is whether there was a concerted effort not to share this information or whether it was just frankly, almost an oversight. We know there are procedures for just about everything that occurs in this building, and especially when you're talking about something as serious as the health of the Secretary of Defense. But that being said, the closest thing that we've gotten to any sort of an explanation for how this happened was the chief of staff, Kelly Magsamen. She was notified about 24 hours after Secretary Austin was admitted to the hospital. So on Tuesday, January 2nd, she was notified he was there. Well, she had the flu at the time. So we're told that because of her illness, she did not notify the White House for 48 hours until Thursday. We've asked a lot of questions about how that would be the case, whether there would be redundancies, someone else in his front office who would notify the White House, or maybe was her illness just so very severe that she couldn't make a phone call and let the White House know. We don't have answers to that. I will say the Pentagon is reviewing their procedures here, and that includes the Pentagon's general counsel is looking into some of the things that you mentioned in the lead-in, including whether there may have been any laws or statutes that were violated here during this notification process. So in other words, were they required by law to notify the White House, the National Military Command Center, someone to let them know of Secretary Austin's condition? Was there a law that may have been broken here, Ryan? The general counsel here is looking into that.
That's probably something Congress is very interested in as well. Courtney Kube, thank you so much for that. Aaron, let's go to you now at the White House. I mean, how are they responding to all of this?
Well, the White House is saying that the president has complete confidence. Those are the words the press secretary used today when she spoke to reporters about this issue at length, with the spokesman for the National Security Council as well, saying that the president appreciates the fact that Secretary Austin took responsibility for the lack of disclosure on this, and that he did put out a statement about it over the weekend, Ryan. At the same time, there were questions about whether the president would be asking Secretary Austin for his resignation, and the National Security Council spokesman John Kirby, retired Navy admiral, I should note, said that that was not a conversation, that there was no expectation of that. The president values Secretary Austin's advice and his leadership, and that they expect that when he's better, he will be returning to his post, returning to the Pentagon. That's the view from the White House right now, Ryan. Yeah, and of course, Aaron, this comes at a time where there are two hot wars that the U.S. is not directly involved in, but obviously has a huge interest in. Did all of this have any impact on U.S. operations? I mean, the short answer to that is no. We know that there was a National Security Council call with President Biden and Vice President Harris on New Year's Day. Secretary Austin, to the best of our knowledge, was a part of that phone call on New Year's Day and was able to fulfill his function, giving advice to the president in that setting before he was rushed to the hospital, as Courtney just described. And so as the military operations continue in whatever capacities they do, in particular, you talked about in the Middle East and in Ukraine in terms of their observation and the activities that would be happening, they would still go on as you might expect. The commanders on the ground would be making immediate decisions. And when it comes to larger issues, for example, the Christmas Day strike that was ordered by President Biden, those are the sorts of things where you would expect the Secretary of Defense would be directly engaged with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, with the National Security Advisor in giving advice to the president. And there wasn't a situation like that over the course of last week where there was a need to get the president on the phone to make a decision like that. And so it seems as though no operations were interrupted.
I'm sure this isn't the end of this, for sure. Aaron Gilchrist, thank you so much at the White House. We appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.